Hello, this is California Convictions Livestream. My name is Aaron Channel, and I served a grip of time in CDCR. That's the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. For whatever reason, that qualifies me to speak on YouTube about my experiences. Some of the stuff I talk about, I just kind of have to infer to the best of my ability. I didn't know that much about prison politics. I can't tell you what the program was, because I was doing other things with my time. What I can tell you about, what is right within my bailiwick, what I'm an expert to speak on, top ramen soup. Oh yeah. Now for starters, the right way that you prepare a top ramen soup is not crunch, crunch, crunch like people do. You wham it at the floor, good and hard, and it bounces off that concrete. And about one, maybe two good thwaps once you know how to throw a soup, you have it broke up perfectly for a broken up soup. Now, mind you, if you're just blanching the noodles or something like that, then you don't necessarily want to break it up, and you might just give it a crunch. But the correct way, the convict way, or somebody who's done time at least and knows the easiest way to break up a soup is against that concrete floor. Thwap! Thwap! The soup is basically the currency of CDC. And I mean at the lower level. Of course, a book of stamps or a pack of cigarettes or a bindle of tar or, those green dot numbers. Really, that's what real money is. If you're buying a rack of 10 cell phones, you're not doing it with top ramen soups. Trust. That said, if you are doing, normal your friend business, your friend made you a couple of rockin' burritos, and then he came by a couple days later and went, oh, hey, can I get a couple of soups? Which is a reasonable request. Every once in a while, people just toss a couple soups one way or the other. What flavor do you give him? You start with knowing there's a couple that are sold on every canteen in one form or another. It's going to be a beef, a chicken, and a chili. They might be just a little different. It might be roast beef or picante beef or creamy beef. But there's a beef, a chicken, and a chili soup generally that is accessible to everybody, whether they get it in the package or the canteen. But there are some fancy pants flavors like the chili lime habanero shrimp, which most, goodness, excuse me. Which most people don't want. But whenever they do want it, whenever they want something unique and exciting, that's what they'll request. So if they know that you're running a store or you get regular packages, so you got 12 of each flavor back there under the locker, most commonly you're going to want to hand out, and people are going to most appreciate that chili habanero shrimp. Why says I had to do Jailhouse cooking sessions where I make and eat the food. Okay, now, this is actually on my list. I'm trying not to extemporize too much about future projects because, look, frankly, the YouTube channel thing is an incredible amount of work. I don't think I was entirely prepared for how much this was going to take out of my time whenever I started doing it. And I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to be doing this in 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is. I'm not going to stop. For as long as there's one dude tuned into the live stream, I'll be talking. I've been thinking about exciting projects for, a little more distant in the future whenever I'm looking for the next thing to do. I want to do a YouTube cooking channel, prison style, and really do it right because I've seen people, look, if you're going to make a prison meal, you can't make it in the microwave of your kitchen. That's not how you make a prison meal. You know what a George Foreman grill is? You start with 4 nice big thick books, maybe dictionaries or Bibles or textbooks. You make yourself a candle. All a candle is a can of Skull that you drilled a hole into, you ran some string through, and you filled with baby oil or refined cooking oil, maybe butter, anything like that. Hell, if you wanted to, you could use alcohol, but you're wasting some alcohol doing that. You light the candle, which is just a can of Skull that's filled with something that'll burn. It's a candle. You put that on top of the books, and you put that under your bunk. Because all a bunk is a hunk of steel. It's a big cookie sheet, basically. Whenever you lie down on it, it pops down like a cookie sheet does in the oven. Whenever you get up, it pops up. There's some nasty paint on it, but if you take yourself a pair of fingernail clippers, maybe a key that broke somewhere, and so you have the tip of it, the end of a screwdriver, heck, maybe just some aluminum that you got in a can, it's probably strong enough to scrape that paint off, get down to the steel. Once you do that, you get yourself a Brillo pad, a green pad, anything like it, and you scrub it real good, get anything nasty off of it, because this is a hunk of metal that people sleep on. It's a bed frame. You light that candle, you put it on top of the books under your bed. You got to get real good at measuring how far up or down you're going to have that candle, because you want that grill to get red hot. Go ahead and take some awful meat. Take the rat meat that they serve us, the red meat of death. You only get it every 5th lunch or so. But it was slimy red bologna that nobody would eat every 5th lunch or so. There'd just be, hey, anybody want this? Nobody did. It was bad. But you know what? You put a little bit of butter down on that grill. Maybe you slice up a couple of things of onions. We don't have shallots, but that's fine. Just take the corner of your onion and pare it down a little bit. Oh my goodness, man. You can make that red meat of death that nobody else will eat. The smell comes wafting out of your cell, and your neighbor will come by and go, man, you're cooking in there, aren't you? You just got to put the little bit extra preparation into it. That right there was a primary cooking thing. And if you're going to do a prison cooking show, if I'm going to make a prison pizza, I'm not going to do it in my microwave in my kitchen. I got to get me a hunk of steel that's 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, because that's what I'm used to sleeping on. And then make me up a George Foreman grill and see what we can really cook. Because you can make really decent food with a heated piece of metal and some boiling water out of your hot pot, and then just what you can get out of the kitchen. Because what you can get out of the kitchen is the same stuff people cook with in the real world. It's beef and onion and butter and flour, salt, spices, garlic, a little bit of pasta or some rice maybe. Make some soups on the side, and then you toss that sauce down on top of it and share it out to the homies. Yeah, I made the spreads whenever I was locked up, so that is absolutely something I want to do in the future. It's just I haven't done it yet. Mega Tofu says, glad to catch you live in Vegas Prison Stories. Checking in. That's all right. I have a strong suspicion that Vegas Prison Stories probably ate some rockin' spreads in the time that he was locked up. By and large, what I wanted to speak about was soups. Because I cannot overstate for anybody who hasn't done time how important the soup is in an inmate's day-to-day life. You might have a bad dinner. Even on a yard with a mandatory program, and most yards don't have mandatory program. Most yards are not, one up, one down, soldiers keeping a piece hooped 23 hours out of the day type of yards. For those that are, for the ones that have a mandatory program, that means you must walk to chow with your people. In case something kicks off, you all got to be together. But you don't have to eat the garbage that they serve. And so it is a done thing that on days in which the food was awful and the fellas were all walking, because, the fellas are all going to walk. Yeah, if you needed a couple of soups because they happened to have fed some awful meal to us, the chicken beef kebab Hungarian goulash delight, and they had the strangest names for meals, like, slightly more toned down versions of that. It's okay. You just, hey, anyone got a couple of soups for me and my Sally? I guarantee you. Somebody's, oh yeah, absolutely. You just slow drag. Whenever you come home, I'm going to run in, I'll get the soups, I'll toss them out the door, no big deal. Because at the end of the day, it's 50 cents. It's not that much money, and sometimes it's given with the, hey, I'll get you back when. Because just about everybody in prison has some kind of hustle. And I don't mean a lot, but you can be a Maytag, take in laundry for somebody. You can sew it up nice. You can be a singer. You can work anywhere in the institution. If you're a porter, you run things, and maybe somebody tosses a couple soups your way. If you work in the kitchen, you walk out with some sandwiches or some rockin' burritos, or when nobody was looking, 2 carts full of apples, whatever it might be. Since everybody has a hustle, the hey, let me borrow a couple of soups is a real low bar. But as such, it's also a great way to be assessing them dudes around you. And I saw anybody who could afford to toss a couple of soups out there and then not get paid back be really happy to toss a couple soups out there and not get paid back. I know the perception is that prison is this place where you have to murder each other over the slightest thing. After all, the dude didn't pay you back your 50 cents. That's 2 soups. That's a meal for you and for your celly, man. Ain't you gonna go get a piece and handle business over that 50 cents? No. And neither is anybody else. Maybe things get bad. Maybe, it's an issue of respect. Because the dude came out and went yelling about, flapping his gums. There's no way I'd pay you back. You ain't about nothing. Screw you and your dead homies. Yeah, okay, well, then when he gets stabbed up, sure, it was because he wouldn't pay the 50-cent debt, but really it's just because he didn't know how to maintain. There's plenty of guys in prison that go from yard to yard, owing a little bit here and there, $5, $10, 2 soups, 10 soups, until eventually they tap and get sent to another yard. And they run up a little debt, $50, $10, there. Anybody who could afford to lend out that 2 soups or that $1 of the bar of soap to the new guy, hey, let me borrow this. They were happy to do it, and they were happy to not get paid back because the new guy is telling you something cheap. He charged you 50 cents to let you know he ain't about nothing. Don't trust his word. He ain't gonna be there. Dude, 50 cents for that lesson is a cheap lesson. He could have hung with the homies. He could have waited for the right day. And, left with a couple hundred here and there. That was always my attitude about, hey, can I bum a couple of soups? Is if you want it as a gift, absolutely. If you want it as a loan, well, it is an assessment of your character. When and how you pay back a loan, especially if it's given on real easy terms. Like, here you go, man, don't worry about it when you can pay me back. Vegas Prison Story says that he still smashes his soups on the floor, and I get it. This is a carpeted room that I was making a soup in recently, and I swear I found myself wanting to smash the soup on the carpeted floor and realizing it wasn't going to play out the way it should. Doing this YouTube channel has actually been, eye-opening is strong. Revelatory. The thing about prison is that whenever you get out of prison, you don't want to think about it anymore. It's kind of like how whenever you left middle school or high school, you put that chapter of your life behind you. Your high school friends, even the ones you were close to, maybe some of them you're still friends with, but by and large, the things that were important, the friends that were important, the day-to-day activities, whatever it is, well, you grew up and you graduated, or, in my case, maybe you dropped out, but whatever it is, you moved on to a new chapter in your life, and whenever you look back at it, it seems foreign, slightly, a different life. Well, prison is like that too, except, of course, that everybody there was an adult and a full-grown adult. So the choices that they made, especially the bad choices that they want to put behind them, they have a lot less ability to claim the foibles of youth, to say, gosh, I wish I hadn't been that bit much of a knucklehead. You do something dumb when you're 14, it's because you're 14. You do something dumb when you're 24, it's probably because you're dumb. And here we are, with a bunch of guys in prison, 20, 30, 40. Nobody wants to look back at that time. They're not proud of being there, the choices that landed them there. And it's an awful place. Listen, I tell a bunch of stories. Some of them are fun, some of them aren't. Other guys on YouTube, they stress how horrible prison is. Others stress how fun it is. Others stress there are a lot of stories, a lot of perceptions. Dude, I promise everybody agrees it's a nasty place. It's not fun by and large. Bad stuff happens in prison. When you get out, you don't want to think about who you were. You don't want to think about where you were. You don't want to think about the friends that are still there. I was making a little list in my head of the dudes that if they paroled in the next 10 years, because plenty of them still have enough time that this decade is probably the time frame I'm looking at, whether or not I'd want to be there and pick them up at the gate if they needed somebody, and I know some of them do. Man, it's a hard thing to think about, those guys, some of them decent, some of them monstrous, frankly, that I met while I was incarcerated. Some getting out, some still in. It is a foreign and strange concept. This is a deep tangent from the subject of the day, which is, hey, what's it like doing soups in prison whenever people hand them out? Hey, can I borrow 2 soups? But it does occur to me as I speak about prison. Making a spread in prison, there's really 2 ways that you might go about it. The most common is basically a soup-based spread. And of course, there's 100 different spreads somebody could make, and everybody had their favorite big meal that them and their homies would make. But generally speaking, either it's a bunch of soups with some decent stuff off to the side. So they make the basic thing, which is like soup and cheese and beans and meat or whatever the heck is in the spread. But then off to the side, they have the good stuff, the sausage and the gravy and the meat, and they'll put a scoop of that on everybody's plate to make sure that everybody gets an even and fair amount of the good stuff. Or they'll go the other way. They'll make a really large pot of pretty good stuff, say a couple of meal pouches with meatballs or prime rib or whatever it is, and meat and cheese and beans. And then they'll just mix in a couple of soups worth and dole it out. Spreads can come out so thick it's like a brick. They'll cut it off a log and slap it down on an opened up chip bag for you. Or they can come out pretty soupy, like a big stew that everybody tossed something in, and to some degree it does turn into a stone soup situation. A lot of the times everybody's hungry. Especially maybe y'all just came off a lockdown, so it's been a long time since some of the fellas had a real big meal. Or perhaps just you hit the canteen and you're not used to going for $80 in a month, but your old friend or your ex-girlfriend or your mom or your pop or whoever it was looked out a little bit and sent you something extra. So you decide to splurge. But you don't want to carry the whole party yourself. If you're feeding 10 or 15 people, well, everybody should bring something, right? And they do. Now, mind you, Frank down the way might be a little bit, he doesn't have much money. And so what he brings is a bowl and a spoon. But that's okay because nobody minds that Frank's a little short because Bobby likes Frank, and Bobby brings 2 bags of chips and a meat log. That's a lot to bring to a spread, but again, we're feeding 15 people. So you crunch up a bunch of them chips and you set them off to the side and you chop this meat log into little cubes and maybe some soy sauce or some A1 steak sauce out of the kitchen or anything like that. You toss this all on a George Foreman grill and the smell of that smoking meat hits, comes wafting out of the cell, and everybody looks up and can hear the sizzle and now that is good eating. And I think I'm talking myself into the idea of doing some kind of prison cooking channel because I'm a little hungry now, and if I was actually cooking this stuff instead of just talking about it, I'd have something to eat at the end of the day. Let's see here. Gina Lester asks if I knew any diabetics in prison. That is a smart and interesting question. SADF, the prison that I went to in Corcoran, had a high diabetic population. There were a number of conditions for which you would be sent to SADF because it was the prison preferred to treat people with this condition, and diabetes was one of them. So I actually dealt with a number of inmates who had serious diabetes. Frankie, who I haven't even spoken about to any real degree, he had diabetes to the point that occasionally I would make very sugary coffee drinks. And he would brave his disease and drink far more sugar than he should, and go into a low-grade diabetic coma in the corner of the room until the caffeine kicked in, and then he'd go to the medical line and have his insulin checked to make sure he was all right. Dude was bad. Frankie had multiple black belts. He said he had 3 before he came to prison. But he'd been one of the few guys that took combat seriously in prison, as in him and, the 1 or 2 other friends would always be looking for the place to spar. And he'd said a number of times that whenever he eventually got out, and I believe he was serving 30 to life or something absurd like that he'd like to go and certify for whatever more black belts he was eligible for, because he'd been training like it was his job for years of being locked up. They assigned him a job as a clerk across from me. He replaced Poochie, who was my boy. And he was a fun guy to be around. Very non-invasive about the fact that he was, a martial artist and could take you in a back room and snap your neck or whatever. Was like a guy out of a movie, honestly. He'd sit just at the very edge of the out-of-bounds line where, he wouldn't get in trouble for being too far away from the guard towers, but where he was making as little of a spectacle of himself as he could. And he'd turn around and sit in the full lotus position, and then belt out katas from just the waist up for about 15 minutes. From a distance, it didn't really look like much. It just looked like he was, moving. But if you happened to, be eating lunch with him and be sitting right with him, like I was on 1 or 2 occasions, whenever he said, "Hey, look, this is what I'm doing right now," man, dude could move. Interesting folk you meet in prison. I wanted to speak, at least a little bit, about a gentleman that I met at High Desert, about whom I haven't spoken at any length. DB. Now, to be clear, DB was a liar, and I mean that in the best way, in that he was a convict and a storyteller, and I caught him just once or twice where he was spinning a tall tale that got away from him. I went, man, that didn't happen, DB. No. And he was so good at spinning that story around that he could just about recover it. Well, now, didn't I say that I was out at sea with no money the week before? So it makes sense that I would have known a guy who was a shark wrangler, right? And you'd stop, you go, no, DB, you're not selling that whenever a shark came into the inlet where you lived, your neighbor happened to be a retired shark wrangler and you and him went out in a rowboat to check it out. And he'd kind of laugh and go, well, I'm not going to say I did or didn't, but I told my story. Even his name, DB, and he obviously, not his real name. But he was selling it as his handle because he was low grade trying to create the story that he was in some way connected to D.B. Cooper. D.B. claimed that he'd lived in the Pacific Northwest around the time that D.B. Cooper had stolen all of his wealth. D.B. had been in prison since the day I was born, whenever I mentioned my birth date of December 8th, 1980, the day after Pearl Harbor Day, the day that John Lennon was shot. DB had perked up and went, no kidding. I feel old, you want to feel young, that's the day I was arrested. And this one he was actually able to verify with paperwork, because to some degree paperwork is something you have available for people to see. Dude had been arrested on the day I was born and had been locked up since, serving life without. Speaking about some of my compatriots, my fellow convicts, is a little awkward sometimes. I worry that they're still alive, that they've retired, and my flapping my gums about the things I saw in prison is going to mess up somebody's life in an unfortunate way. I know it seems like a long shot, but whenever you speak about actual crimes and criminals, yeah, that does happen. It can. And so I change a name here or there, maybe a date. And I don't mean anything obtrusive, just enough that I'm confident I'm never getting subpoenaed on any of this stuff. Well, DB is easy to talk about, because dude was 60-something if he was a day when I met him in 2003, maybe 2002 even. Yeah, late 2002. Which doesn't mean he can't be alive in his late 80s, early 90s. But I'm reasonably confident they're not going to drop any subpoenas on him or anything like that. And he was a character. Slick Armor checking in. And Shaliste Girl checks about Wes Watson. Well, I hope Wes is doing very well with his particular genre of prison content. Thankfully, he and I do very different content. I don't think that I could yell at the camera and motivate, and that's just as well, because we all have different voices, and I suppose we all have different people that are receptive to hearing us. I'm only going to speak for just another 5 minutes or so. I'm restricting these live streams to a half hour for the time being. Last thing, I wanted to note that a recent video, and look, I don't have enough people in the chat right now that anyone's going to care. This isn't going to break anybody's heart, but the recent video that I did, where I spoke about my case, the fact that I was originally charged with a hate crime, and that I do not feel that pedophiles, minor attracted persons, should in any way be afforded federal protection as a class. Well, that video got pulled. It didn't meet community guidelines. I don't know exactly what it is that YouTube found offensive about it, but I watched it, twice just to make sure, and the only thing I can think of that might have gotten it pulled is my saying explicitly and clearly, pedophiles, minor attracted people, are not a protected class and should not be. And that I wish that it was codified into the hate crime law, where they say that orientation is a reason to be a victim of a hate crime. I wish it said that being a minor attracted person was not a type of orientation. That said, I'll keep saying that for as long as anybody will listen. That's on the very short list of things that, listen, I'll keep chatting, even if it doesn't pay a dime, and I don't care. This is fun. This really is. Thank you for listening. And there's only a couple of conditions, one is that I get to say things like that to anybody that'll listen. Talk about cases like Scooby, Shane Goldsby. Hey, there's a great example of pedophiles are not a protected class. Snapping whenever you found out that somebody hurt your little sister in that manner is not the same as premeditated murder, but that's just my opinion, my 2 cents. All right, I am going to be closing here. Thank you very much for checking in, and Big J Profit at the bell. All right, thank you very much for listening, and have a nice day.